Tonight on NewsCenter. President Park wants to better communicate with the Korean people. As part of that effort, she sat down with the chief editors of Korea's major news outlets today. She'll also meet with the leaders of the three main political parties in the near future. The Korean leader says the country needs to consider adopting a Korean-style quantitative easing in a positive manner to revitalize the economy. And Korea will take more active steps to help the nation's shipping and shipbuilding industries to reduce debt and weather a global slump. The government says companies and creditor banks must work together and work fast. NewsCenter begins right now. It's 9 in Washington, 2 in London, and 10 on a Tuesday night here in Seoul. Hello and welcome to our viewers all across the globe. You're watching Arirang News Center. President Park took a step closer toward opening ears to the people today. The Korean leader sat down with chief editors of Korea's major news outlets. She vowed to better communicate with each and every part of the society. Now, that includes speaking on a regular basis with the nation's three biggest political party leaders. Our top office correspondent Song Ji-sun has a wrap-up of how the president plans to best interact with the country.
President Park Geun-hye met with the chief news editors of major media outlets over lunch on Tuesday in a bid to expand her communication with the public. In her opening remarks, Park outlined her three-year economic innovation plan that involves creating growth engines to sustain Korea into the next 30 years. She also pledged to listen more closely to the public and work for their needs.
남은 그 임기 기간 동안 이번 선거에 나타난 그 민의를 잘 반영해서 또 변화와 개혁을 이끌면서 또 각계각층과 협력과 소통을 잘 이루어 나갈 수 있도록 각고의 노력을 다 하겠습니다.
The president's meeting with the news outlets is her first in 3 years, possibly indicating a shift in her stance, following her ruling party's defeat in the general election 2 weeks ago. After accepting the outcome as a reflection of the public's will, President Park suggested that the three main parties in parliament form a new negotiating body with the government. She added that she is willing to meet regularly with the party leaders after returning from her trip to Iran at the beginning of next month. Meanwhile, in remarks directed to Arirang TV's news director, the president stressed the importance of having news about Korea in the world, saying that Korea's economy and security is closely tied with the international community. Saying that she will do all she can to make the people's lives better, President Park called on the press to bridge the gap between her administration and the public and build momentum for the government's efforts to spur growth. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Also in focus at the top office were issues such as North Korea's growing nuclear threats, the economy, and last month's parliamentary election results. Our Lee Ji-won has more on today's meeting.
During the rare meeting with the chiefs of Korea's major news outlets, President Park Geun-hye touched on numerous issues that have garnered public attention. At the forefront is heightened nuclear threats from North Korea, as well as international efforts that are needed to impose sanctions on the regime. President Park answered questions about China's cooperation on the matter, saying that Beijing has been surprisingly active. Aside from productive talks on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit, she said she's had a follow-up phone call with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, who promised to completely and thoroughly implement the UN sanctions on the North's regime. President Park affirmed that close coordination with China would continue on the North's nuclear issue with the shared aim of securing regional peace and security. As for the economy, President Park reiterated structural reform is both necessary and important. The president also noted that solving the unemployment problem after restructuring is just as important. As for solutions to these problems, she mentioned that more investment, development of new industries, and legislation like the dispatch employment law will not only create new jobs, but help companies find employees. Asked whether Korea should consider quantitative easing and inject more money into the slowing economy, President Park said it is a stimulus that should be positively considered. She added that hiking taxes, which some in the opposition have proposed, should always be the last resort. The president also addressed the results of the April general election and acknowledged that public judgment should be taken with much weight. She said it appeared that the people are still concerned about the economy and unemployment. In regards to this, President Park said she will work closely with the 20th National Assembly to handle these problems. 이지원, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, down south in the nation's parliament, Korea's three main political parties are busy solidifying their leadership structures before the new National Assembly seated next month. And as is usually the case in anything politics, it's no easy task with internal power struggles. Our parliamentary correspondent Park Ji-won has the latest from the National Assembly.
The ruling Saenuri Party brought its membership together for a special half-day convocation on Tuesday, with most of its newly elected lawmakers present. Party leaders apologized for the defeat in the recent parliamentary election, which saw the party lose its parliamentary majority. Senior lawmakers vowed to transform the party with a new vision of truly serving the public. To get there, the first order of business will be to elect a new interim leader after the party chair stepped down in the wake of the election. The party is also seeking to elect a new floor leader, a position that will be held by a different person. Party members held a heated debate on both positions, but no decision was made. The race for key party leadership positions is also heating up over at the main opposition Minju Party of Korea. The party soon began discussing who its next leader will be after having decided recently that it could not unanimously endorse interim leader Kim Jong-in as new chairman. The party is still mulling over whether it will hold an election to elect a new leader or continue the current interim system until things stabilize. Meanwhile, the party will elect a new floor leader and vice floor leader in May, and the competition is likely to be between incumbent lawmakers and newly elected representatives. The centrist People's Party is also holding a two-day convocation with its 38 newly elected party lawmakers in attendance. They aim to solidify the party's vision for new politics after the election saw them fulfill their goal of transforming Korea from a two- to a three-party system. Co-leader An Cheol-soo and Chun Jung-bae both said the party needs to pay attention to the will of the public in order to bring about positive changes in society. During the meeting, party members also plan to focus on electing a floor leader, and four-term lawmaker Park Ji-won, who was once a key aide to late President Kim Dae-jung, is expected to be high on the list of possible nominees. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Was North Korea's latest submarine missile launch a success or a failure? Well, opinions remain divided. While most have written it off as yet another failure for the reclusive state, a few other experts are saying the test may have gone exactly as Pyongyang had hoped and planned. Our defense correspondent Kim Hyun-bin explains why the mixed reviews.
An expert on North Korea's missile program believes Pyongyang's short-lived launch of a submarine-launched ballistic missile last Saturday does not necessarily signal a failure. In an article published by 38 North, a U.S.-based North Korea monitoring website, expert John Schilling pointed out that the missile accelerated well past the speed of sound. Pyongyang claimed the test was a success, but many experts labeled it a failure since it only flew about 30 kilometers. Schilling said the short launch may have been part of the plan. And looking at the blast and color of the fumes released, the North may have tweaked this technology after repeated failures with liquid fuel engines.
There's a possibility Pyongyang switched to solid fuels. They are relatively easier to maintain and manage through harsh conditions. There are advantages to using them in missiles loaded in submarines that have long operation times.
He said the solid fuel design is still in the earliest stages of testing. but it could make the development process easier. And he warned that North Korea's SLBMs could pose a real threat to the U.S. and its allies by 2020. However, the Pentagon says it is still assessing the latest test, which it views as a provocation that only serves to destabilize the Korean Peninsula. Hyunbin, Arirang News.
Well, there is a general consensus in our international community that North Korea's missile and nuclear provocation should be dealt with pressure on the regime, but there are also opinions that related nations should be open for talks with Pyongyang. Well, it's a sentiment that's also held by a former high-ranking U.S. official who spoke in Seoul Tuesday. Kwon So-ah reports.
The countries most closely related to the efforts in denuclearizing North Korea, namely the members of the six-party talks, should be open to dialogue with Pyongyang. This, according to the CEO of the Asia Group and former Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, Campbell, who was in Seoul Tuesday.
I would be of the view that the United States, South Korea, Japan, China, Russia should absolutely leave the door open for talks with North Korea. I believe I'd like to see a five-party meeting on North Korea, if at all possible, just to discuss what has taken place in the last several months. China occasionally hints that they would support such a thing.
Campbell said when he was in China 3 weeks ago, he could tell that the Chinese were very anxious about what's playing out in Pyongyang and how they currently have little influence on their ally.
I'm struck that in almost every corner of the world, China has gaining influence and power. And you see that in every capital in Asia except for one, and that's North Korea. And I think we would expect China over time to exert their influence and power more dramatically.
To gain more consensus on dealing with North Korea, Seoul's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se will be in China this week at the 5th Foreign Ministers meeting of the Conference on Interaction and Confidence-Building Measures in Asia. On the sidelines, he is planning to hold bilateral talks with his Chinese, Russian, and Turkish counterparts. The Foreign Ministry said Tuesday that issues related to North Korea will top discussions. Minister Yoon is expected to call for closer cooperation from the 26 members of the forum in hindering the regime from carrying out further provocations and address the importance of thorough implementation of UN Security Council sanctions. It's the first time South Korea is sending its top diplomat to the quadrennial event since it became a member in 2006. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Disturbing news on human rights abuses in North Korea. A new report says those caught taking the ultimate chance for freedom are often thrown into a life of squalor and back-breaking labor. Our correspondent in charge of North Korean affairs, Connie Kim, has more on the fresh human rights report.
North Koreans caught defecting are often sent to prison camps located in Gaechonsi or Haeryongsi. The camps are notorious for their awful living and working conditions. Former prisoners report having had to live behind a 3-meter-high fence and say they were categorized according to their health and workload. North Koreans caught defecting twice have been sent straight to these prison camps. But this year's white paper on human rights in North Korea, published by the Seoul-based Korea Institute of National Unification, says the punishments for those attempting to flee have intensified. Those caught defecting even once are immediately sent to the camps. The harsh realities that prisoners face are documented in the testimonies of 180 defectors who were once imprisoned at the camps. One defector described an incident where a female prisoner was brutally beaten for dancing. Another defector said prisoners were beaten up if they didn't fulfill their daily quota for work. Making the situation worse, multiple layers of sanctions have recently been imposed on the regime, making it difficult to provide North Korean citizens with humanitarian aid. Experts recommend that government organizations and private institutions should aim to devise policies addressing the North Korea's human rights issues separate from the sanctions imposed on the North.
Currently, the Justice Ministry and private institutions are researching the human rights situation in North Korea, and the Unification Ministry recently said it will establish a North Korea Human Rights Record Center. Rather than having overlapping roles, each entity should have separate tasks to devise policies to improve North Korea's human rights situation.
The general consensus among experts is that efforts to improve human rights in the North should be planned with long-term goals in mind in preparation for a reunified Korea. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Let's try making sense out of the latest developments on the North Korea front and speculate what must be going on the ground in the reclusive state. We have a special guest in the studio with us tonight, Dr. Suzanne Scholte, the U.S. chairwoman of the North Korean Freedom Coalition and president of the Defense Forum Foundation. Suzanne Scholte, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, I know that you're here for the North Korea Freedom Week. Tell us a little bit about that and why you're here.
When we've had it in Washington, D.C. and in Seoul. When we've had it in Washington, D.C., we've had congressional hearings, visits with the President of the United States, rallies on Capitol Hill, protests at the Chinese embassy. And then here in South Korea, we're having it in South Korea this week to basically prepare for unification and regime collapse, which we believe is imminent if we do the right things. So that's the focus this week, is the role the defectors will play in unification.
So, if we do the right things, you said, what are those right things?
Okay. Well, there's the only thing that is keeping Kim Jong-un in power is three things. Number one is the lack of support for the defectors in doing the work that they can do to get information and change in North Korea. And I say that because the defector NGOs are the most effective of getting information in North Korea, reaching out to the people of North Korea, and changing the attitudes of the people in North Korea, and yet they get very little support. But the final thing is, there's no internal opposition inside North Korea. That regime would have been gone if there had been internal opposition, if the people in North Korea felt there was an alternative to Kim Jong-un, because the situation in North Korea has changed so much. The people are so much better informed. They have so much more knowledge about the outside world. They know that the regime has lied to them, but they still don't see an alternative. So one of the goals during North Korea Freedom Week is that all the sessions that we're having all this week, we're broadcasting every night into North Korea so that they can understand that their enemy is Kim Jong-un, not South Korea, not the United States. And we want to work with them for their freedom and their human rights. And so that's, to me, key to bringing about change in North Korea. It's for the people there to understand that. And
I suppose let them know that there is an alternative to that regime.
Absolutely.
Right. Speaking of defectors, we've recently seen 13 North Korean defectors come to South Korea from China. What are you reading into that event?
That is huge. The fact that these defectors, such a large group defected, it means that they had to talk with each other. First of all, the last flow of money going into the regime, if the sanctions are enforced, is going to be from the overseas laborers. This is cold cash for the regime. But the second thing is the fact that they all did that together. They had to have developed some kind of trust for each other. Part of the way the regime maintains power is that citizens inform on each other, because they live in a state of terror really all the time.
Now, can we also see significance in the role of China in having them defect to South Korea this time?
Absolutely, excellent point, because that's been a sticking point with China all these years. The way that they've treated the refugees, the fact that they have an inhumane policy of repatriating North Korean refugees, which they know when they send them back to North Korea, they will definitely face torture, they will definitely face imprisonment and sometimes execution. So the fact that China allowed them to be able to leave South Korea, you're absolutely right. That is a very, very significant. I felt like that was a way of China saying, you know, we're fed up with the way the Kim Jong-un regime's behaving. They're causing a lot of headaches for us, and I feel like that's a very significant turning point in China's policy.
We know that sanctions have been implemented by the international community, as well as various unilateral sanctions have been imposed on that regime as well by South Korea, U.S., and etc. Do you think those sanctions are proving to be effective in curbing North Korea's nuclear ambitions? Do you think they're effective? They will be effective?
Absolutely, if they're enforced. And I have to say that I worked on the legislation to get the passage of the North Korea Sanctions Act. passed in the Senate and the House for several years, and people were like, "Oh, Suzanne, great job." And I said, "Well, I owe it all to Kim Jong-un because we were working on it for so many years, and then finally it went right through the Congress because of Kim Jong-un's provocations." We should have called it the Kim Jong-un Sanctions Enforcement Act because it's really important for people in North Korea to know that that legislation was very carefully written so that it targets the money that flows into that regime from the illegal activities of Kim Jong-un. They were very careful to make sure that there were exceptions for humanitarian aid or any kind of assistance that could help the people of North Korea. So if the sanctions are enforced, then you will see a drying up of the flow of money that's going in to that regime. And this is really significant because this happened back some years ago with Bank of Delta Asia. When that bank account got frozen, that was when North Korea went back to the negotiating table. We know we got them where it hurts. And I think that if sanctions are enforced and the countries stop harboring and allowing North Korea to use their countries for slave labor, then there's going to be a complete cutoff of money to the regime. It shouldn't affect the people. It should only affect the regime because the regime is already hurting the North Korean people. So I think that this is going to be a very significant time. And I hope to see that there will be change in North Korea very soon.
Well, we will keep our fingers crossed for that. Suzanne Scholte, president of the Defense Forum Foundation in the U.S., thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Korea will take more active steps to help the nation's ailing shipping and shipbuilding industries. Lenders will regularly review progress of restructuring plans that are submitted by shipping lines and builders. All this to breathe life back into the country's sluggish economy. Kim Min-ji has more.
The Financial Services Commission is urging stakeholders to take a stronger approach to restructuring Korea's traditional core industries.
Business conditions are deteriorating structurally in industries such as shipbuilding and shipping, and the situation is not likely to clear up soon. Our task is to either root out low-performance companies or support them to ensure they remain competitive.
The financial regulator is looking at strict restructuring, especially for shipbuilders and shipping firms. Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, for one, has been advised to reduce wages and jobs on top of the over 700 positions it already cut. Creditors have been asked to get Hyundai Heavy Industries and Samsung Heavy Industries to also come up with self-rescue plans. The FSC has also called on the debt-ridden shipping sector to complete renegotiations with ship owners to reduce their charter rates by next month. If they fail to do so, creditors may have no choice but to put them under court receivership.
It remains to be seen whether efforts at the government level will work. These industries are in a state where restructuring is inevitable. Companies may initially push back, but if it helps strengthen their competitiveness, drive down costs and create synergy through mergers, it could produce good results.
The Financial Services Commission also announced a plan to limit the fallout from its restructuring scheme. It vowed to expand the assets of state-run banks and come up with measures to support workers who are laid off. The regulator says it will implement a three-tier plan that will start with the restructuring of industries most affected by current economic conditions, then cover companies or sectors suffering from oversupply and credit risks. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, restructuring these ailing sectors is expected to be a painful process. The stakes and costs are high and the loss of jobs potentially massive. To help us better understand why it's deemed necessary, our Kwon Jang-ho zooms in on the stark reality faced by many Korean industries.
A global economic slump, as well as the rise of competition from China, has led to plummeting sales, orders and profits in Korea. Last December, the government named 5 industries that were in need of an overhaul: shipbuilding, shipping, construction, steelmaking, and petrochemicals. Shipbuilding has arguably been the hardest hit. Low oil prices and falling trade have led to orders drying up. Meanwhile, Chinese rivals are winning more orders, especially for smaller ships. Last year, the Korea's big three shipbuilders, Hyundai Heavy Industries, Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, and Samsung Heavy Industries posted a combined loss of $6.5 billion. It was also the first year all three players posted losses. The order backlog also dropped to the lowest in 12 years, and targets were lowered by 20%. The shipping industry is also in trouble. Korea's number 1 and 2, Hanjin Shipping and Hyundai Merchant Marine, have both had to seek debt settlement agreements with creditors after amassing a combined debt of $9 billion. Falling trade, especially exports to China, have been the biggest factor. Korea's imports and exports have posted negative growth every month since the beginning of 2015. A shake-up in the global shipping industry, with the world's biggest shippers forming new alliances, is causing further uncertainty. Operating margins for the steel-making and petrochemical industries have been relatively healthy, but production for both continue to decrease as cheaper steel from China and low oil prices have decreased their demand. Construction is the only one that has seen growth in recent years. The government knows that time is of the essence to save these struggling industries. The country's economy relies on them. It's looking to push through with restructuring before political burdens start to mount ahead of next year's presidential election. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Well, speaking of the nation's sluggish economic growth, Korea's growth rate has remained in the 0% range for the second straight quarter. The slowing growth prompted by sluggish demand at home and abroad is raising concerns that this low growth trend may become a long-term trend. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the numbers and more.
Growth in Korea's economy has slowed again for another quarter. The Bank of Korea says the country's GDP expanded just 0.4% in the first 3 months of this year from the previous quarter. This marks a slowdown from the 0.7% growth posted a quarter before and is equal to the pace of expansion recorded when the country was hit hard by a MERS outbreak. Dragged down by faltering exports and dull domestic demand, the first quarter growth figure came in low despite aggressive government spending.
The government front-loaded its budget in the first quarter, which pulled up investments in social overhead capital. The government's spending and investments contributed greatly to first quarter growth.
With that, construction investment went up almost 6%, while facilities investment plunged. Exports that have been on a downslide for over a year now dropped 1.7%, and private consumption also dipped. Citing weak first quarter performance figures, Korea's central bank trimmed its latest forecast for growth to below 3%. This has further stoked worries of Korea falling into a low-growth trap, a reason why some analysts see more expansionary measures down the road.
The best scenario for the Korean economy this year would be growing at around the same level as last year, but most private institutions don't see that happening. That means the country needs a more aggressive fiscal policy compared to last year's extra budget.
But with the central bank for now saying that the economy will show signs of gradual recovery this quarter, economists say more monitoring should come ahead of a supplementary budget or a key rate cut. And facing skepticism that a rate cut will not be a cure-all for conditions that mostly stem from structural issues, experts say the Bank of Korea will remain cautious about moving the rate that already sits at a record low 1.5%. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Exploring space. Well, South Korea and the U.S. will solidify their mutual commitment to space exploration. They're expected to sign an agreement that could help the two countries make great strides in their space missions. Our Kim Ji-yeon has a preview of the two nations' second round of talks on this very topic, set to take place in Seoul tomorrow.
Korea and the United States will ink a deal in Seoul on Wednesday to expand their cooperation on space exploration. The agreement is expected to help Korean scientists make greater contributions to space programs on an international scale by giving Korea an opportunity to invest in and work with U.S. space technology. Korea is upgrading its space program, planning to send an unmanned vehicle to the moon by 2020. So the deal will likely help the country advance those ambitions as well. The deal touches upon joint exploration of Mars, projects involving the International Space Station and satellite imagery, and co-development of space technology designed to address issues from climate change to natural disasters and food security. This is the first time the U.S. has signed a space cooperation deal with an Asian country and follows the first bilateral space cooperation meeting held in Washington in 2014 and President Park Geun-hye's visit to the country for a summit in October of 2015. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Well, the world's biggest greenhouse gas emitter, China, has halted plans to build roughly 200 coal-fired power plants. Bruce Harrison is live in the studio with me. Now, Bruce, how does this impact China's, quote, war on air pollution?
Sure, Kanyang. Analysts see this as a big boost in fighting climate change. Progress is slow, but another positive came just last week. China joined many other countries in signing the landmark Paris Climate Accord. And in recent years, China's Communist Party has done a lot to tackle air pollution in and around Beijing and some other major population centers in the east. But a lot of their efforts have been only focused there. And just last week, Greenpeace says big business coal still in China and a lot of parts outside the east are heavily inundated with smog.
It may also be because industries tend to move to and develop in the central and western regions when faced with so many restrictions on pollution in the east, which in turn leads to increasing industrial emissions.
China's slowest economic growth in a century has also cut into plans to build new plants. According to the New York Times, some coal-fired plants there are operating at just 40 or 50% of the time. Reactor number 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in what's now Ukraine exploded 30 years ago today, and governments are still working to make that area safe again. As victims remember the disaster in vigils, governors of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development pledged more than $90 million to help decommission the plant.
Once again, our international partners express solidarity and support in resolving an extremely important issue. I would like to thank separately the EBRD for their position, for their support, and the G7.
The project's underfunded, and according to World Nuclear News, it will cost several $1 billion to decommission just Reactor 4 and safely house it.
It's only the last week of April, but it felt like summer earlier today. Let's go straight over to our weather center to check out what the weather has in store for us. Now, Ji-yeon, it was rather hot this afternoon, I would say. What was the top temperature in the capital?
Well, 29.6 degrees Celsius was the high for the capital today, the second highest temperature in April since records began.
I'll bet. That sounds more like a midsummer to me, but I hear some parts saw highs even getting above 30 degrees Celsius.
That is right. Parts of Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces did. Now, Gwangju County in Gyeonggi-do province was the hottest at 33.8 degrees Celsius, feeling more like late July. Strong sunshine and warm southwesterly winds boosted central region's daily highs today. And we saw more clouds from the late afternoon. Southern regions and Jeju will see showers from tonight, and it's going to rain until Thursday morning, while elsewhere we'll have pearly sunny skies tomorrow. So the capital areas will have mild temperature readings tomorrow, but rain is going to bring down the highs to below the seasonal averages in the southern parts of the country, hovering around 15 degrees Celsius in the afternoon. So on that note, let's move on to tomorrow's temperature readings. Daily low here in Seoul, Gwangju, Jeju will kick off at 13 degrees Celsius, 11 and 12 for Daegu and Busan. And as for the daily highs, Seoul will see a high of 24, but Daegu and Busan will only make it to 13 and 14 degrees Celsius. Higher than normal temperatures are in the forecast for the rest of the week under partly sunny skies here in the capital. That's Korea for you, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, it's a beautiful time to be in this country right now. That is our broadcast on this Tuesday night. I'm Moon Gon-young. Thank you, as always, for being with us, and we hope to see you right back here same time tomorrow on NewsCenter.